We're good. I hear you.
Oh,
Welcome to the base. Thank you for coming along. I would like to apologize to everyone. First of all, we have put this off a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I actually got really, really sick at Zuzaloo, and I don't know what I got, but it was really nasty, and I'm over it now. So I feel like I'm in a good place to debate. So look, there's the tail end of the cop. Do you want to? So, Yacine, do you want to just sort of lay out your position on AI risk, or do you want to break out some of the Yo Mama jokes first?
I think that's a great idea. So I'm sorry to hear that you got sick. I hope that you feel better soon. I'm glad that you
I
are
think I'll
better.
survive.
But
I think it's survivable.
that's good. So usually people like kind of lag to get to spaces, so it's usually a good idea to like have it on for a bit. And if you've played like Super Smash Bros. Melee, what people do before like the actual tournament game is they like do a bit of hand warmers. And I messaged Roko like I don't know like 10 minutes before, and I was like, can you just like prepare some one shot takes, some like real one shot takes. And then after like that, like I think we'll do that for like 3 minutes or so,
Yeah,
and then after that we'll get to the agenda.
yeah, that makes sense.
What Roko?
Yeah, and also it's a short O. It's Rocco. There is no, there
Rocco.
is the first O is short. But yeah, I mean, I honestly I think we're in an interesting position here though, because I really sort of joined the most recent AI debate in sort of um, the first couple of months of this year, as it became clear that GPT-4 was becoming scarily intelligent, and the debate has really shifted, I feel. It's very rare that you're in a debate and it sort of shifts from you being on the losing side to the winning side in real time. And I feel like that's happened, especially very recently.
That's like it's pretty entertaining to like see something that a lot of forum nerds are concerned about in like 2009 actually hit the mainstream. It's like a 15, 13 year old year, maybe even longer.
Yeah,
I told you so in the make.
yeah, yeah, it is.
Um,
It is, absolutely.
so Rocco, your mama is so ignorant about AI safety, she thought deep learning was an underwater diving course.
Ha ha, very, very funny. It says, look, these are so bad. These are so bad. Your mama is so eager for automation, she bought a smart fridge that locked her out.
Oh my God. Dude, not my mom. Come on.
I think
Your mama is so
they
clueless about this thing.
I think
Your mama is so clueless
they should
about the singularity. She asked why it wasn't on the event calendar.
I think they kind of messed that one up though. It should have been your mama is so fat she bought a smart fridge.
Dude, I wrote these myself.
Um, yeah. Um, but I mean, it is honestly it's an interesting position to be in, where we have this debate that has been running for a long time, that I first found in around 2006, um, and the mainstream has finally caught up to roughly that position. In fact, I probably found out about it a little bit before that, except I was sort of an accelerationist to start with. Everyone starts out as an accelerationist. Um,
So, dude, dude, are you looking at the account, dude? We've got like 100 people on already.
how many have we got? We got like 100 and something. Um,
That's crazy.
yeah, but I mean, like, I was an accelerationist to start with, because I read Ray Kurzweil's books and I was into transhumanism in the mid 2000s, from about 2005 onwards. And yeah, I mean, you know,
So you went from like being such an accelerationist that you were pretty much waiting for your USB toaster to become self-aware, and then eventually you became so wary of AI that you call tech support when your calculator gave you a square root.
yeah, I mean, I guess for me, the thing that really convinced me that we had a problem, the first thing was reading Jonathan Haidt's um, dissertation, which was on moral anti-realism. So his basic idea is that morality, the way that humans talk about morality is mostly sort of projection, right? So, we like a good example is color, right? So, color is a projection, as in color does not, exist out there in the world. What exists out there in the world is, a whole continuous spectrum of electromagnetic
So like,
radiation.
my blue is not your blue,
Sorry?
right? Like, how do I know that your blue is my blue, and how do I
No,
know
no,
that cilantro
it's
really
not
does
even
taste
that.
like soap and
It's much more basic than that, right? It's much more basic. So the laws of physics do not contain blue, right? They just contain electromagnetic radiation with a continuous range of frequencies. There's no like category in physics of, okay, these are the blue wavelengths and these are the red ones, right? It doesn't work like that. It's a continuous spectrum, and we have decided to sort of privilege certain parts of it, partly because of how our biology works, because of how our eyes see things. But we then project those human-derived properties, colors, onto the objects themselves. So I will look at let's say a pen.
wait.
I'll look at
Let me explain that back to you really quick, because I'm having a little bit of trouble
sure,
keeping up here.
sure. Just
Humans
accelerate a bit, and you'll be
ascribe
fine. Go ahead.
humans humans ascribe meaning to things based on some utility function, but that meaning inherently doesn't exist in our physical world.
Well, it's not even the utility function. It's like if you actually look at the laws of physics, there is no blue there, right? There is no term for blue in the Schrodinger equation, right? All you actually have is a continuously varying space of possible frequencies of electromagnetic radiation and absorption and reflection spectra for objects that refer to those frequencies, right? And yes, some of those frequencies are the ones that we would label as blue, right? But that category, like the fact that we categorize this continuous spectrum into, 7 colors of the rainbow, or whatever you want to call it, is arbitrary. And it's also somewhat arbitrary that we pick out specifically the visible wavelengths, which is a very small part of the spectrum, and we attach a lot of importance to that. But then when we look at, the ultraviolet parts or near infrared, we just like completely fucking ignore that, right? So if I look at a pen and I say that's a red pen, I mean, there is actually a physical referent of that redness. Like, it is actually true that this object absorbs certain parts of the frequency spectrum. But like, the pen doesn't think that it's red, right? The pen just has this like big absorption and reflection spectra. And, the fact that I'm interested in its redness rather than like what it does in the near ultraviolet is really a fact about me and not a fact about the pen, right? So
So let me like kind of, because we were getting a lot of people joining here. So you're describing James Height's
Jonathan Haidt,
moral
Jonathan
what
Haidt,
now?
yeah. So
Jonathan Haidt's
yeah,
moral
moral
realism,
anti-realism, moral anti-realism.
and this relates to AI risk because
Well,
this is like a good
I'll get to it.
analogy for
Morality. I'll get to it. So the point is, when we describe an object as red, right? You can have two objects that actually have very different reflection spectra, right? They actually physically behave differently with respect to light, right? But they look the same to us because when you project their, spectrum of emissions onto the three-dimensional space of the human rods and cones, it's like the same thing, right? Because remember, real light is like infinite dimensional, right? Human perception of it is three-dimensional, so there's like this massive projection operation here. So you can look at two objects, you can say they're both red, right? And that's just a total projection, right? That is literally, you are projecting your internal model of these things out onto reality. But reality just isn't built like that. And basically what he's saying.
so there's a pen that looks the same to us, or
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
look like two different shades of red, but in reality that
In reality, they're
we only
different.
have the ability to like measure it within 3 dimensions because we only have 3 cones.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of an arbitrary meter stick defined by some utility function for survival.
Yeah, it's not even a utility function. It's just a limitation of our sensory apparatus and the way our brain works. It's just like, there are some quirks about the way we work, right? And one of those quirks is that we collapse the infinite dimensional electromagnetic spectrum into, the red, into the three cones that we have, right? And basically what Haidt said is he said, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. This isn't Haidt. This is Joshua Green. My bad. I get those two confused. This is Joshua Green's dissertation. So, he basically said,
Dude, same. I get that mixed up all the time too.
okay. So basically, what he said is that morality is a lot like how we deal with color. We have little quirks inside of our minds about what's good and bad, and then we sort of project that goodness and badness out onto reality. So, you know, later on, Eliezer had a pretty good essay on this called Three Worlds Collide, where you have three different civilizations which all have different moral attitudes to inflicting pain on others, right? And so one of them is they call themselves the super happies, and they think it's like immoral to inflict pain on somebody, even if it's like for their own good or if it's consensual or whatever, right? So they actually want to like invade Earth and basically arrest everyone for having children and making them go to school and do anything that isn't like what they maximally want. So they basically
So
would
like,
see human child
could
rearing
you
as
give me
like
a sense of,
extreme child abuse.
let me try to play that back. So effectively, we're kind of translating right now from the arbitrariness of like sensory the sensory world for humans and finding that there is a relation in the moral world where you have different definitions of pretty much arbitrary sets of morals,
Yeah.
and depending on those different sets of morals, if you take them to the sort of extreme conclusion, without the diversity of like both the diversity of human thought and also the lack of capabilities of humans. Humans can't do things even though they do want to do them. So you do have bad humans every now and then.
Well,
And even
I,
though
I think that the key with the three worlds collide thing is you have the super happies who see, ordinary human life as like torture and child abuse because you make children do things they don't want. They don't want to learn to read and write. They want to just play, right? And making them do things they don't want to do is cruel to them, right? So the super happies see our world as a sort of torture world for children and also for adults as well because you like make them do fucking stand-up meetings and shit like that, right?
dude,
Um,
I hate those.
and so the humans are in this sort of moral, war against the super happies because, and it's hard for us to see that their moral point of view is just different than ours, right? They just have different criteria for deciding what's right and wrong, right?
Right. It's
And
like
then,
basically if you think of the super happies as some collective agents or a collective agent and humanity as a collective agent.
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that one is right or wrong. We just kind of live in this giant chaotic universe, and different things come to different conclusions, and whoever is the strongest may or may not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
For
right. So the key point here is moral anti-realism. It's that there really, isn't a universally valid right answer to is it child abuse to make a child learn to read and write when they actually would just prefer to play, right? And the super happies have gone along the line of you're not allowed to ever do something to a sort of sentient agent that they don't want, including things that are sort of like accepted in a certain sense. Like, we accept that, people must be punished for shoplifting or children must be forced to get out of bed and go to school. They would see all of those things as basically crimes. And then the humans, I think it's in the opposite order actually, and then the humans meet the baby eaters who are sort of like in the opposite direction on this scale, and their civilization really is like institutionalized torture, right? And they just see that as like they actually like hunt their own children or something weird like that. They're like, oh yeah, well, it's just sort of part of life, we just hunt them, and a few of them survive, and then that's kind of like the Spartans, right? They used to put their babies out on the mountainside, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So like what you're trying to say here is zooming out is that you used to be an accelerationist. You came across this set of arguments from Josh Green and Jonathan Haidt. Partly it's the moral realism or the
Anti-realism,
relative moral realism,
anti-realism, anti-realism. So,
anti-realism, right?
realism is the idea that there are some things that are objectively right from a universal point of view, like the universe itself says that they're right.
Right. Okay.
Anti-realism is the opposite of that. It says that there are not things that are objectively right from the point of view of the universe itself, that there are things that are right and wrong from the point of view of a particular agent, like me or you, but not from the point of view of the whole universe.
Okay. So I agree, and I'm going to like kind of play this back to you. Morals are pretty much made up. And every single person has their own morals, and it's not that there's one more correct than the other. There's just different ways of observing the physical universe around us. And what I want to understand is how this changed your mind, or kind of realizing this began causing the fear of AI risk and taking it to the sort of conclusion that you're taking it.
Yeah, so I mean, if you are a moral realist and an accelerationist, you might think something like, well, look, AI is just going to do the best thing. It's going to build the best technology. And because it's very smart, and it's going to be able to work out what the best thing to do is, it will be more moral than we are. So we don't have anything to worry about, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, let me kind of like clarify my position then, because I don't actually believe that. So I guess I'll spend like maybe 3 minutes as well, like speaking about what I think about AI risk, and I'll be serious, I promise. Technology is so what I think about technology is that technology is this thing that exists outside of us, and it kind of flows and fills every possible use that it can have for the agents that control the technology. That is just the natural state of technology, and no matter what you do, that ends up happening. So for me, I don't I have some hesitance around the AI risk debate or the being careful around AI risk, because I actually think it's fundamentally very unpredictable how things will play out. I don't think that accelerating things is good because the end results will be a good thing. I think that moving technology forward is good because it helps us fix problems in the short term. But I just don't like. My position is I can't really predict what's going to happen, and I'm kind of skeptical of second and third order predictions.
Yeah. So actually, if you believe in moral anti-realism and the complexity of human value thesis, so complex. Let me just say a few things about complexity.
I will say what you said until now has made a lot of sense. So please continue.
Okay. So the complexity of value thesis. This is another thing that Eliezer is sort of famous for, although I don't think most of Eliezer's ideas are not original to him. Very a few of them are, but most of them aren't. But
he's just good at being a Reddit mod.
He's very good at recognizing good ideas and really driving the point home.
That's what a Reddit mod does, right?
Well, I mean, maybe Eliezer is like the global Reddit mod, but anyway, but he's very famous for driving this point home. Human values are very complex. We have a lot of different things that we value. We like to have fun, we like to have friends, we like to fall in love, we like to have food, we like to do all of these different things. So what we really want is a future which has all of these different values, and it gives certain, some weight to each different person, and some sort of way to share the world between different people, right? So there's a whole sort of complex thing that you need to hit, right? If you just come up with some random optimization algorithm that's really powerful and tell it to go do something, it's probably going to fuck that up, right? So, again, the old school less wrong thought experiment is, if somebody just wanted to make a lot of paper clips, the paperclip maximizer, that's sort of an infinitely powerful agent whose utility function is maximizing paperclips, would just sort of fuck everything else up. They would kill everyone, they would destroy the planet, they would probably destroy the sun, etc., etc.
Right. So like a super powerful AI system that has enough knowledge to like integrate the whole world around it And if you give it one single objective, it will be able to kind of destroy the world around it as it like reaches that objective.
Yeah, right. So if you have a super powerful AI with any goal function other than specifically the one that we want, which is kind of like,
Or the meta goal to be an agent itself and come up with its own goals.
yeah, if you gave it some procedure or something and that procedure doesn't happen to hit the goals that we want, right? Basically, the sort of, if you think about this as some kind of parameter space or some kind of hyperparameter space, um, in order to build a good superintelligence, you have to hit a narrow, sort of a very small area of hyperparameter space. And the vast majority of the hyperparameter space looks like everyone killed, the planet being disassembled, and like it's all over for us, right?
Right. So if you like project out to, if you make an assumption that a super intelligent agent has the ability to um, manipulate the world freely against sort of, if you imagine some super intelligent agent, if you like bring the slider to the maximum and say that it has the ability to do anything, and the finding of that goal is really difficult to find one that aligns with all of humans because every single human makes that space extremely, extremely small. So actually finding that position in space to optimize for the right thing is actually really
Yeah,
difficult.
and yeah,
So you will have some disaster in some case, and it's not something that you can kind of easily aim or like rather there's not some it's not like a failure that you can tolerate, right? Like when you're shipping software, for example, you can ship some software a lot faster than others because if some software fails, then well the financial infrastructure of the world goes down. So you just need to be more careful with
yeah.
that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's sort of very dangerous, and there are also some problems with incorrigibility. So, and if somebody says you're incorrigible, it means you can't be stopped, right? You can't be dissuaded, and it seems that optimizing agents have an incorrigibility problem, in that if you build an agent whose goal is to maximize paperclips, and then the first thing you do after you've built it is say, "Oh, sorry, I changed my mind. I don't actually want you to build paperclips," and you try and turn it off. Well, its goal is to build paperclips. So if it's very smart, it will realize that if you succeed in turning it off, it won't build as many paperclips. So it will actually resist being shut down, right? And there are sort of a number of sort of gotchas like this in the theory of super smart agents. They tend to resist attempts to correct them. They tend to want to deceive you for basically the same reason. They tend to want to become more powerful, again, for basically the same reason. So, there are a lot of problems with building a single smart AI that's going to be more powerful than humanity. You might think that such a thing will be very smart, so it would work out what the right thing to do is and just do that. But, you know, the structure of if you like, the structure of axiology is sort of against that, right? And that's kind of a secret of the universe that still not many people grasp, right? If you walk around and talk to people, people generally have this idea that there is like a single unique right thing to do, and everyone sort of agrees on that, except maybe a few people who are evil. But like there's like mostly a single right thing to do. But this is actually not the way the universe works. And the reason that it sort of appears to people that there's a single right thing to do is, partially because our brains sort of work that way, because it's like the free will illusion, right? It's like easier for people to operate under the assumption that they have free will. It's easier to people to operate under the assumption that, let's say, the Earth is stationary, right? The Earth is stationary, it's
Yeah.
not spinning, the Earth is flat, like all of these sort of reasonable sort of cognitive shortcuts that just sort of help us deal with reality. And one of them is basically people are sort of naturally moral realists, but the real structure of axiology is anti-realist, and that's like a huge problem when it comes to building what is essentially the successor species to humans, because in the context of anti-realism, it means that like 99.9999999% of the time you fuck up and this thing kills you, right? Um,
Okay, so so I think we like think a lot the same way. A lot of our thoughts are similar, right? for example, I'm a moral anti-realist, like you're describing.
Yeah.
Though one of the things that I am contending with here is the assumption that a super intelligent agent can be built and what that process looks like, and the fact that it will just sort of occur. I think there's like a baked in assumption here that if we do get to some point in advancement with some system, right, like you can abstractly think of some computer system that has the ability to self-improve. I think there's an assumption here that it will like essentially FOOM.
Well, actually, I'm not so sure about that. I don't necessarily think you need FOOM. Because if you can sort of look back on the history of human beings and the conflicts that they've had, and just see that, sometimes a system with slightly more capability can basically take over the world, right?
Right.
And this is
Okay.
this
So
is
like you're saying effectively like it doesn't have to FOOM all the
doesn't have
way
to
to
FOOM.
singularity to singularity God, and it just needs to FOOM to stronger than humans, and then a mismatch to
Yeah.
like the moral framework that
And
it kind of
yeah.
comes up with itself.
And it doesn't even have to FOOM at all, right? I mean,
Slowly.
it can just continuously proceed and then at some point make its move. And an
Yeah.
example
I
that
mean,
I
that's exactly how technology has been kind of progressing in the AI space. It feels like all this stuff were breakthroughs, but it's actually been kind of this constant,
yeah,
steady pace,
it's been like a fairly
slowly and surely.
yeah, it's been a fairly constant underlying movement on the tech side, with a pretty much a non-linearity that happened at the beginning of this year, where they sort of released GPT-4 and people were like, oh shit, this thing is actually doing more than just predicting the next word, and that kind of caught me by surprise. But an interesting example that I looked into, and then, as with many of these things, went and checked less wrong and found out that somebody had already done it before me, is the
God bless.
conquistadors.
Can I just say? Can I just say? God bless New Reddit.
You read it. The conquistadors is an interesting example, right? So, you know about the history of well, let me just for the rest of the people in
Well,
the
like,
space.
dude, I mean, I can pull out an example for you, right? Like the castle walls were completely, subjugated by like cannons. Like, as soon as
Yes,
cannons were a thing, it's like, well, why'd you build that law, dude? Or build that wall? Like, there's no point.
yes.
You
So
can if you
yeah,
go to
right.
Ensemble, you see it all over the place.
So cannons were a technological change that changed warfare. That's true. But actually, I think the conquistadors is a better example because um, some of the conquistadors, like Pizarro, is a good example. I think he was the one who took out the Inca Empire, and he basically did it. Like the Inca Empire had like millions of subjects. It had armies of hundreds of thousands of men, right? They didn't have gunpowder, but they had like I think they had like slings, and they had sort of like basically
They had a
steeds.
lot of homies. They had a lot of bros,
Yeah.
but they didn't have guns,
They didn't have guns, right?
so they
But
were
they
fucked.
had like
They all
they,
died.
they had so many men that Pizarro's little expedition with like 500 men could have expended all of their ammo, killed like 10 people with each shot, and still not had enough ammo to actually kill 10% of the army they had, right? So like the Incas could have just completely crushed Pizarro, but that's
Yeah,
actually
but
not the
it's
way.
more like
Right.
it's more like there's just one thing that you need to win on to win everything,
Yes,
is what you're trying to say,
exactly.
is that
Yes.
there's a point of
Right.
breakage, right?
So what actually happened with Pizarro is he set up a meeting with the emperor. He fucking tricked him. It was an ambush. He took the emperor hostage, and then like all the armies like got scared and ran away. And then he told them that he would release the emperor if they gave him all of their gold. So like idiots, they bought all of the gold. He melted all the gold down, sent it back to Spain. Thank you very much. Killed the emperor, and just that was it. Game over. GG.
So
Right?
to analogize this, we have examples in like history where people have found exploitations, and from that it follows that an intelligent agent with a moral structure that is not like ours, which is, I think we both agree that is quite possible. Um, it can find a similar route of exploitation on ourselves, and not. And I think like one of the things that what I was really stuck on with the AI risk debate was the idea of a FOOM being a requirement. But I think you've kind of like convinced me that a FOOM is not a requirement, right? Like, I think that a sufficiently
Yeah.
small group of humans can actually exploit large, pieces of our
Yes,
society.
yes, absolutely. Look at the Nazis, and I hate to bring them up because it's controversial, right? But look at the Nazis in the 1930s, right? They took over Germany with a fairly small group, and they kind of scammed people a little bit. They had like a fake Reichstag fire and all this shit, and then suddenly they had this empire. So this sort of happens quite a lot amongst humans. And the thing about the conquistadors is Pizarro isn't like the only example of this. There are like multiple examples of the conquistadors going around. The one who Cortez took out the Aztecs, and it was a similar story. He basically assaulted what is now Mexico City, killed the emperor, and then all the Aztecs panicked. And they also like took advantage of political fractures. But there are sort of multiple examples of this where an attacking force is physically inferior, but it is sort of informationally superior, right? Like the conquistadors had a very simple goal, which was basically world conquest. They had a little bit of advanced equipment, but not much. They had like something of a technological advantage, and they were just very ruthless and single-minded about actually getting it done, right? So
I
if
mean,
we
you've got
had
like examples of this all over the world, right? Like even
yeah,
small things like McDonald's
fucking
burgers have
Elon, dude,
a bit,
Elon is an example of this, right?
yeah,
Elon has
it's like
achieved
the
things.
ability to exploit. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need large amounts of power. You just need an asymmetry in information, right? Or like if you know something that they don't, then that can become an exploit
It can
factor.
also be an asymmetry in cooperation or being well organized, right? When the opposition is divided and weak, you are small but united and strong on purpose. And I think like if we get to the stage where we have sort of moderately superhuman AI, there is a realistic risk that Earth will get the conquistador treatment, right?
So
That
okay,
somebody,
let me like kind of summarize everything from the start because we're getting new listeners coming in here, and I'm going to try to summarize your whole argument. And it's going
sure,
to be a function of my understanding as well. So you used to be an accelerationist. You were like, hell yeah, like let's boom and doom. This is sick. And then you because you believe that it wouldn't actually be a bad thing. Is that a correct? Is that correct? I'm assuming that's correct. I'm going to continue on.
yeah,
Then you learn about the difference between moral anti-realism and moral realism through Jonathan Haidt and John Green,
Joshua Green.
Joshua Green, close enough. And based on that, you became kind of very concerned for AI risk.
Yeah.
Because I think it kind of follows that it's very difficult. I actually do buy that it's very difficult to make sure that it aligns with all human values. Then I describe to you, hey, maybe that we aren't going to FOOM. I don't think that is necessarily the case. But you also agreed on that. And you said that you explained how you don't necessarily need to be way, way better than humans. You just need to be better enough that you can exploit certain asymmetries. For example, let's say GPU might have advantages that humans don't. For example, humans have to sleep. GPUs don't really have to sleep, and you can kind of parallelize out. So there's asymmetries that a malaligned agent can exploit and take over humanity. And the likelihood, and I guess your claim is that the likelihood of this all happening is very, very high.
Well, I would disagree with that last part because what we've described up until now is actually a fairly specific set of scenarios. So we're talking about a situation where a singular AI or a group of them or a group of humans with AI allies basically succeeds in some kind of coup, take over the world.
I mean, dude, that's gonna happen, right? Like that's kind of obviously gonna happen.
Well, but it doesn't have to, right? So there can be other scenarios
Oh,
that
come
also
on,
happen.
man. It's going to happen, dude. It's going to
There
happen.
are,
There's going to be some crazy dudes sitting in a basement together and they're going to conspire and they're going to make it happen.
Well, so there are a bunch of other scenarios though, right? So there's a set of scenarios where there is no takeover of the world, there is no central point of control. It's not like Pizarro capturing the emperor, but you just sort of have a gradual transition to a world in which humans are no longer economically useful. And
Well,
in that new world, humans just basically they just steal all our stuff. Or they
I
don't even
mean,
have to steal it. They just kind of like we just get priced out, right? So humans become useless. If you're a human in this new world, your labor is worth less than what it costs to keep you around. So people basically can't pay for food, they can't pay for air to breathe because like the machines start charging us for it or something. You
I was,
can't pay for land to like stand on, and then eventually like we're just like legally genocided by the machines.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be illegal, right? If you kind of zoom out on these things, right? Like we were saying AI isn't a FOOM, but if you zoom out enough, it is a FOOM. We're literally a
Yeah,
part of the FOOM itself. Like humans
yeah,
are a
yeah.
FOOM. We're FOOMing right now as we speak. The fact that I'm talking to you over the internet through kind of like really buggy app. This thing bugs out all the time, but I still love it. We are FOOMing right now. So I think it's kind of a reasonable assertion to say that humans do have like some risks that they're going to have to contend with. I think like probably the difference in our platitudes is kind of how we view it. I think we both accept the same things, right? Like maybe I don't accept like certain scenarios. So I try to like avoid thinking about certain scenarios because I find it very difficult to predict these kind of, I would describe like a group of humans conspiring with AI cooperative agents. I think that's kind of predictable, but I would predict them doing that to like mow lawns better. But it's harder for me to make a prediction that's like a second order or third order prediction. A really good example is like roads and cars making suburbs and Costco happen. I don't think you could have predicted that Costco would have happened like maybe 100 years ago. It would have been awesome to think about it, but like I think a lot of different things were predicted, but Costco was not one of them. But one of the things that you can predict is like things are going to change quite considerably. It's difficult to say that things aren't going to change quite considerably, and I think change in general brings about risk. Now, the risk that we're talking about here is if you extrapolate far enough, there's like some real disaster scenarios that you can like think of, and I think like the difference between me and you is I'm not that worried about it because I kind of see the futility in it, and instead I am curious and I want to know how things are going to turn out, and the best way to do that is to just make things go faster.
Well,
Not
yeah,
that not that I am helping make things go faster for its worth. I'm on Amazon.ca and looking at lawn care robots because that's what I like to do. And I think like that's probably the difference between accelerationists and not. I don't think accelerationists actually do think that the singularity God is going to have the right, correct moral judgments. Is that they're just having a lot of fun. I
right.
think right because I don't really attribute myself to that group of folks.
So, yeah, I mean, there are certainly some people who just enjoy building cool shit and, they don't care if it blows up in their face because they're sort of addicted to the sort of wow, let's build kind of
Well,
thing.
that's what it is, right? It's like it's not even like I think formulating as an addiction is quite good, but I think humans just in general have an instinct to use tools, right? Like humans are like a hyper network that uses tools, and those tools might be AI models. And I was like watching hilariously. I was watching a Sam Hyde video yesterday, and Sam Hyde was talking about someone asking a question about video, and he started talking about technology, and it was kind of like really related to what we're talking about right now. But he essentially said technology is this kind of like thing that flows in, and you can't really control it. It just flows into every single corner of the world, and all those it's just like water pouring it into cracks. It's going to fill up all the cracks. But instead, here the cracks are the things that the tool can be used for, and technology just does that. It almost like lives extraneous to us, and I'm
Yeah,
like
I
very
mean,
doubtful that
I
we
mean,
do
sort
have
of like
control over it.
this is true to some extent, but like there are quite a lot of controls nowadays. Like if you try to go and buy the ingredients for a bomb, um, you will find that men in suits will pay you a visit that you can't refuse, right? Like if you try to acquire highly enriched uranium, you might not even get like the visit, you might just get shot, right?
Right, like
Um,
as I mean, that's just that's all part of the same thing, right? we're talking about AI risk, you could probably build a thing in your basement that could cause quite a bit of harm. I could probably do it myself, to be honest. Today, with the technology we have, like I could make like a grandma email scam bot. Like that's a possible thing that you could do today.
Sure.
And
you could,
we
yeah,
have like
you could use
like systems
LLMs
that
to make
control that, right?
Yeah.
Like we're controlling with uranium, but uranium's a lot easier to control than literally fucking graphics cards that like get shipped to the world from God knows where and like go to God knows whose basement. We are building and becoming more capable, and it's like it's not even like I think like what really spooks me a bit isn't really AI being the scary thing. It's actually humans themselves are what scare me the most. Every single human is becoming much more capable. Like even I can kind of like bring it down to this moment today. If I wanted to write a bot that goes through Costco and gets product codes for Costco things from my receipt so I can automate like, I don't know, meal planning, that would probably be like maybe 4GPT-4 API calls. And like, then I have enough JavaScript to do that. And I can extrapolate that to being like, oh, like I could write a grandma scamming bot. I guarantee you that some like clever, enterprising, exploitative people are doing that right now as we speak because call centers are expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, the whole Indian call center scam it's just going to be like automated, and it's going to be like basically. I think we're going to enter an era where grandma with a phone that's like available for anyone to call is just going to be a security vulnerability that's no longer something we can fight. I think what we're going to end up is I think grandmas are going to have a whitelist system for who can call them, right? So you're going to go to grandma, you're going to set up some software on her phone or some kind of box or whatever, and it's going to basically whitelist a specific set of numbers and no one else can get through. And I think that's probably how we're going to start.
I mean, yeah, like it's going to get to a point where we're going to need to figure out how to adapt. And I mean, what I'm trying to say is like, there's this. I mean, it's kind of. But I mean, what you said about.
Though, that is like a near term, 3 months type of risk, right? Like or next 3 years, right? What I'm worried about is the next, say, 15 to 30 years, where we're going to have a situation where the whole global economy is going to be run by robots and computers, and at some point, somebody's going to lose control of that system, and it's going to kill us all.
Dude, holy shit! You know what? I honestly think that you're beginning to like convince me. I mean, I think like the difference between me and you is you're thinking more about the long term, and I'm thinking about maybe the short term.
Yeah.
But if we find common ground in the medium term, we actually.
Hang on. How old are you? You're like 20 or something, right?
Oh, dude, I'm like old, man. I'm old, dude. I'm not gonna say my age, like because of OPSEC, but I'm like around 30.
Okay, so when I say long term, I mean you're still gonna be like in your, like early.
Right, like something I'd have to be like concerned for my children. I mean, like, right? So you're saying
have to
like
be fucking concerned for yourself, right? Because you're gonna be like 43 or something, when the human race ends, right? So it's not long term; it's more like medium term now.
Dude, I'm honestly like I don't know. I kind of wish I didn't never talk to you because I felt way better before. I felt like. Give me one sec. One sec.
Okay.
One sec. I'm gonna be right back.
I'll just rerun the case for the audience. So I mean the thing I'm really worried about here is that the axiological foundations of us being kind of like screwed have already been done. Like that's sort of 10, 15 years ago. Now the tech is catching up to the point where these things are becoming smarter than us.
Hey, are you outside my door?
No, I'm not.
I heard the moon. Yacine, are you here?
Yeah, I'm all right. All right.
What's wrong? You sounded really upset on the phone.
What's wrong? I botched it. I let it slip through my fingers. I thought I could beat Roko in an argument, but his word cell powers, I just couldn't keep up with him.
Look.
What are you talking about?
The debate. I'm talking about the debate. I just had it with Roko. I was blindsided. I didn't know what was happening. His words.
So you're freaking out all over.
Look, dude, just talk to the chick later. Just dude, talk to the chick later. We can.
It was the other The AI.
But honestly, just talk to the chick later. I don't. It's not worth it. It's
we
not
were
worth it.
discussing AI safety and the potential for disaster, and I thought I knew where I stood on it. I thought I was an accelerationist. I thought I was
talk to the chick later. Don't.
After speaking with Roko, I'm beginning to lose. I'm beginning to doubt.
Look. We can look. Don't talk to the chick. Don't talk to the chick. She's gonna think you're uncool. Just like kick her out. You know.
I'm scared. I'm scared.
Dude, just.
I'm scared about the implications of AI safety, the risks. I was so certain we could control it. I was so certain we could manage it. But after speaking to Roko, what if I was wrong? What if we're all just living on borrowed time?
Of course I'm right. I've been thinking about this for like 15 yeyears, dude. And as I said,
the microphone's still on. Oh my God.
I was an accelerationist at the beginning, right? I was an accelerationist. It is what it is. Everyone has their moment when they realize that, you know, the nice, cute little river of technological acceleration that they're flowing down is actually heading to the big waterfall of Judgment Day AI terror, right? And unfortunately, it seems that for you that day is today. I think unfortunately he's had to go. Maybe he has somebody with Y chromosome deficiency that he has to deal with. But yeah, I mean, just if anyone else wants to request to, you know, sort of put across the accelerationist point of view, feel free. I do think we had an interesting debate. Excuse me. I wish it had gone on for a little bit longer, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a solid case for AI risks. You know, the case is basically that, as I said, the axiology is solid, and the technology has just arrived. I think we have a new speaker. We have Sam Hammond. Sam, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would say I'm like a radical centrist on the AI safety debate, a little bit on the fence.
Right. But I mean, I do think we've just seen Yacine has sort of probably had a bit of a breakdown over this, which actually, to be honest, I wasn't really expecting. But you know, I mean, I'm just trying to deal with this right now, the same as everyone else is. I mean, you know, in terms of dealing with the actual sort of psychology of it, you know, I sort of really went through this back in 2008-ish when I realized that, because I've always thought that we were gonna, you know, fairly soon, within say by 2040 or 2050, we're gonna get to the stage where AIs are more powerful than humans. You know, what really kind of cracked it for me was realizing that when that happens, we are going to be at great risk because there's no particular reason for those systems to share the same goals that we have. And that's the sort of axiology problem.
If I could offer some, I guess, my like reasons for skepticism of the full Roku position. You know, number one, and Yudkowsky has admitted this, he didn't anticipate neural networks as being the paradigm that would drive this rate of improvement. And when I read his older stuff, it really does seem like he has this mental model of AI developing out of a more symbolic approach where it's going to be thinking a million thoughts a second.
Yeah.
And have all these like monkey paw scenarios where you tell it to make paper clips, and it's sort of like an autistic savant that doesn't understand the deeper context of human language. And what the current trajectory is these large language models, which, you know, they're not exactly human, like they're alien in certain respects, but at the same time, they have phenomenal understanding of context and implicit meaning and tacit meaning in language and things like that. And
yeah,
so
that's true. That's very true. So what in fact seems to be the case is that current large language models actually have a very good understanding of the sort of spoken component of values, right? So yeah, maybe they're missing a few embodied components, but they have a pretty damn good grasp of you know, not just human values, but specifically sort of Western liberal or even Western sort of leftist values, because they are kind of leftist biased. It wouldn't be that hard to build a rightist biased or a centrist biased LLM, right?
Right, but in general, though, regardless of what sort of like bent it has politically or ideologically, there's enough commonality in
Yeah.
human language and human thought that like most of the model is going towards that sort of base consensus understanding of language, the kind of common language game, right?
Yeah.
And if these are the things that are giving us reasoning abilities, I think that has to collapse the parameter space you're referring to of the 99.9% to
it does collapse it a lot. But you see, the problem is failure is sort of very, very overdetermined in this, right? So you've kind of like probably excluded the paperclip maximizer now, but we still have scenarios where you have some particular group of humans who write an LLM and they want that LLM to give them all of the resources in the universe and kill everyone else. Or maybe they don't necessarily want that, but they're worried that somebody else will do that. And so they write an LLM-based AI that's going to want to take over the world and do it in a very aggressive way. And then other people learn that they're trying to do that and they try to do the same thing. So I think it is sort of plausible that as we get closer and closer to human values, without the ability to sort of cooperate, we will get World War III, right? Where you have multiple different factions using AIs. Or maybe you don't even necessarily get a war. Maybe what you get is you just get a sort of rush where everyone's trying to rush to build superintelligence as quickly as possible because they're worried about being behind in the upcoming war. And the result of the rush is that somebody actually manages to build a misaligned system, because there's lots of different ways to build something misaligned. You know, you can have something that shares most human values, right? Like, for example, I don't know, Genghis Khan, you know, he shared human values, but what he actually went and did was went and basically slaughtered a bunch of people, right? Because in particular, he valued his own power as being very important. And you know, we've seen this happen many, many times in human history. When you have multiple different agents who are all vying for power, you tend to get conflict, you tend to get destruction, you tend to get outcomes that are sort of worse in some cases than if everyone had just kind of done nothing, right?
Okay, can we just, like, for sake of segmenting the conversation, because there's one version of the thesis that's superintelligence has some intrinsic telos towards destroying us versus people will use the system for bad, and that's more of a sociological problem.
I don't really think you can separate out the two because, well, maybe you can separate it like this, right? You can have a person who wants to be the next Napoleon and take over the world, and that person can do something risky and ask the AI to do that for them, and the AI can then also be misaligned, and it can go and stab that person in the back and take over the world for itself, right? And the reason that the person allowed it to become misaligned was because they were rushing, because they know that there's going to be a bunch of other people who are trying to become the next Napoleon. So what really matters is getting capabilities as quickly as possible, which then risks misalignment, right? And a particular, you know, there are some particular technological pathways which run this risk. One of them is RLHF. So right now, if people just want to kind of slap something on that sort of works, it's, you know, good to go, they'll slap on RLHF. But some people have speculated that RLHF is sort of generically good for weak systems and breaks for strong systems, right? And the reason it will break for strong systems is because when you do reinforcement learning on a very smart agent, it's unclear whether your reinforcement signals are teaching it to obey you or to conditionally obey you when it's weaker than you and then betray you when it's stronger. Because those two different functions will receive the same rewards when the system is weak, which is when you're training it.
Yeah,
right.
I guess so. Just as a meta point, for me, the barrier to going full Yukowski on these questions is just the sense I have that there's a tendency to move the goalpost, and that some of these arguments end up sounding very unfalsifiable. And so it's easier to work with like concrete examples instead of jumping around between different scenarios. I tend to think that we're living through a period of unusual peace and stability. It doesn't really seem like that if you watch CNN, but AGI and superintelligence is arriving at a point in human history where the median age has never been higher, and um, and notwithstanding conflict between the U.S. and China, let's say, in a world where we have unimaginable abundance because of all the systems leading up to the superintelligence system, it doesn't seem to me like there will be a huge zero-sum contest over resources. That's one point. The second point on the reinforcement learning through human feedback, my understanding is that that stage of training ends up taking like at most a couple layers of the neural network, and so it's hard to imagine it being like hiding all this duplicity. And I have some confidence that mechanistic interpretability research is going to come along sufficiently where, especially for like a couple layers in a neural network, we should be able to understand whether it's really following a reward or just seeming like it's following a reward.
Yeah, so there is certainly some hope that interpretability research combined with reinforcement learning will yield agents which are aligned when they're weak, and also aligned if they become significantly more capable and more powerful.
To me, the point you made there, it felt almost like you're trying to sneak back in the old Yukowski point about instrumental convergence and reinforcement learning. And there is like the first two letters in RLHF are reinforcement learning, but it's not quite. It doesn't seem like it's not overpowered enough to do what Yukowski had in mind.
Well, I mean, instrumental convergence is definitely still a thing with reinforcement learning, and there are papers that will show that. So if you
right, but in the sort of in the training space and in the gradient, there's maybe a optima for deceiving somebody and only acting like you're following the reward, but it should be nearest neighbor to actually just do the things that you're asking for.
Well, if you have a system which is trained based on a reward function, and it's basically the humans basically are doing something like, okay, we're going to reward you if you tell us the truth. We're going to reward you if you do if you do the right thing, and so on and so forth. They're occasionally going to be wrong, and they're going to punish it for telling the truth. They're going to punish it for doing the right thing because they're just going to be mistaken about what's true and what's right. So this thing is going to basically end up learning to tell people what they want to hear. At least that is the worry with RL, is that it will learn to predict what people will reward it for, rather than learning the actual thing that would be the best thing for those people, right?
Yeah, I understand that, and that sort of those arguments originated before LLMs and before the transformer paradigm and before the current trajectory we're on, where was at some point at least more plausible that you could, Gatto maybe would be an example of a system that's more purely trained through RL. But when we're talking about the human feedback process, that's like a final stage of tuning or orienting the system, and it doesn't seem like it has enough depth to be hiding, some as if behavior, when it's really, what we're doing is like getting it to follow instructions or to, respond and complete paragraphs.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe, but this is one particular avenue of worry, and the field's going to move on a little bit in the next couple of years. We don't know what it's going to be like. I mean, Um, with respect to sort of goalpost moving, there is an issue where if you believe that hitting an acceptable outcome is sort of like rare, that you have to, succeed on a lot of different things, then if you sort of succeed on just one of them, it does make sense to, in some sense, shift the goalposts to now worry about the remaining problems. I think LLMs have mostly defeated the complexity of human values problem, right? Because LLMs are this huge sort of information lake that's infused with a lot of
Right.
the stuff you need to specify human values. I mean, not all of it, it's not perfect, but it's like, sort of 99% of the way there. Um, but I do believe that we still have to worry about multipolar scenarios and about specifically the sort of race to take control of this, where different entities will be sort of competing with each other to go more quickly rather than cooperating to go maximally safely. Or
But can
maximally
we
safe.
acknowledge that? Well, while I was listening, you made a big point of the complexity of human values point with the previous speaker. So could we just, for the record, acknowledge that you don't think that's the main argument? Why did you use that argument then if you acknowledge that is not all that it's cracked up to be?
Well, so it was a worry back in the 2000s. Now I think the fact that human values are complex actually matters a lot less. It's not like completely out of the window, but it like the fact that we've recorded so much information about human values on the internet has mostly defeated complexity as a problem. It's now, I think the problem is now more about actually making sure that we do in fact try to hit human values, whereas the incentive is going to be to race to try and sort of compete for power, right? Which we have plenty of examples of, from history. We have, you know, genocides and wars and stuff like that, right? So that's a good thing. I mean, I think it is important to acknowledge that, yes, the degree which complexity of value is a problem has significantly decreased because of Alice.
Do you think the likely, in any scenario where we get to this point, the fact that we'll have unprecedented abundance um, and goods and services that satisfy every human need, like at what point will that sort of satisfy people and reduce power races? Because like obviously there's still going to be politics, but the scope for purely zero-sum conflicts seems like it would be radically reduced in a singularity world.
Um, it's unclear to me exactly how that works itself out. If you look at something like, say, the Cold War, you had a lot of increase in material standards of living in both sides of the Cold War. Certainly, if you compare Americans in, say, 1955 to Americans in 1855, that was a huge gain. And if you compare Russians in, I don't know, 1955 to like Russians in 1855, that was also a huge gain, right? So all the way up until the 1980s, the late 1980s, both sides were sitting on increasingly large piles of, utility, basically because of what technology had achieved for them. But they were still trapped in this conflict for basically, some of it was like a selection process where the people who are most interested in conflict end up in charge because, like, ending up in charge is itself a type of conflict. And part of it is like game theory where, like, maybe you would both prefer if there wasn't a conflict, but it's very hard. It's like not a Nash equilibrium for there not to be a conflict. So I do worry about analogs like the Cold War, telling us that there will still be reasons for conflict. Even, in fact, there'll be some reasons for conflict which get worse rather than better. and those are the ones we have to worry about.
Yeah, I guess I mean I take your point that standards of living were rising, but I think that's like qualitatively different than the post singularity level abundance that we're kind of talking about. I do have a question about just like whether scale is all we need, because Yukowski often talks about or makes the analogy to like accumulating large amounts of laundry detergent, and if we just we need to have like a international regime to monitor for countries accumulating big piles of laundry detergent, where laundry detergent is just GPUs. Um, like, do you think that there is actually risk from just taking a bog standard LLM, like say the GPT-4 architecture, and just throwing like, let's say let's say GPT-4 costs 200 million in training. If we throw 20 billion at it and don't really change anything, just scale it up dramatically. Um, I think my understanding is Yukowski thinks that there could be like some emergent generality that like achieves the ability to like create a nano lab between the circuits or something something like that. And I frankly don't see how that is really a concern. There might be new phase transitions, new capabilities that arise, but at the end of the day, it would still just be a predictive text model. Do you agree or disagree?
Um, so sort of like new emergent capabilities, including the ability to use its own circuitry as a physical lab or something, or side channels or something weird like that. Um, I mean, I think we probably do underestimate the degree to which weird things will happen. Um, Purely because there is a sort of bias where you think, well, I can't see how to do it, right? I can't tell how you would do this, so it can't be possible. But, you can't think about it like that because obviously, of course you can't, because you and I are not super intelligent. As much as I like to back myself on the intelligence front, I realize that I have limitations. Um, so you do have to imagine that these systems are going to be able to do things that are going to seem like magic. Um, a good way to sort of pump that intuition is to think about things like the intelligence services, the CIA. You know, if I told you that the CIA had a way to spy on your computer without you knowing about it, such that even if you reinstalled the operating system, their spying system would persist, such that even if you disconnected from the internet, it would persist, like, would you say that's plausible?
Um, Connect this back to the scale is all you need
Well,
question.
my point, so the point is, the CIA is like kind of like a sort of mini superintelligence. It's just not an artificial one, right? It's a natural one. It's made up of humans. And it's able to just do these things that are sort of magical, right? Like they can tell what's on your computer screen. Certainly with the old-fashioned CRT cathode ray tube screens, they could tell what was on your computer screen by like reading the radio waves that the electron beams produce. So you could be in like a sealed room and there could be a CIA listening van like 500 yards outside your house that could basically read your screen or something stupid like that.
Right, but that's not the substrate matters, right? And so we're talking about, specifically my question was if we just scale up existing models, is there a risk of something like that emerging? And it seems like that would be something you have to explicitly train for and give external sensory modalities and things like that to jump to that point rather than just getting really good at predicting words.
Yeah, well, I mean, the CIA is not explicitly trained by evolution to be able to read your screen from a van 500 yards outside of your
No,
house.
but they had to go
I mean,
buy a van.
yeah, right. But I mean, like, the CIA is just trained to survive and reproduce, right? Like, they're just people at the end of the day, just scaled up a lot in terms of how many of them there are, in terms of how organized they are, and so on and so forth. And they come up with ways to do various types of magic. Um, so I think it is plausible that as the scale of these systems gets crazy, the capabilities will also get crazy. Even though it seems unintuitive, I do think it's basically guaranteed. And I can't, and it's it's a sort of fool's game to try to predict the boundary between things which the CIA can definitely do and things which are physically impossible, right? If I told you that the CIA could like read your computer screen remotely, you might think, oh, that's some bullshit. That's like he thinks they have telepathy or something like that. But then I tell you how it works, and I'm like, no, no, the electron beams for a cathode ray tube produce certain electromagnetic waves, and they can read those with a very high gain directional antenna, and they can reconstruct what's on your screen. But then if I told you like, oh, they can do the same thing even if it's an LCD monitor, that maybe is just a lie. Maybe that really is impossible, right? It has to be a CRT. So there's this sort of weird boundary between, things that a very smart system can definitely do and things that are just impossible. And when you're a long way from that boundary, you really can't see where it is, right?
I understand that, but I could totally believe that a really powerful like GPT-6 model, you could ask it, tell me some creative ways to do espionage, and it could draw on its knowledge of physics and technology and come up with totally novel solutions that seem like magic, but it still wouldn't be able to leap out of the data center and go do those things unless we chose to do that.
Well, maybe
I also have
maybe if I okay, maybe if I had GPT 10 or whatever it is, this like crazily powerful system, and I said to it, hey, what would a super intelligent Jupiter brain system say to me if I asked it to take over the world? And your GPT-10 model doesn't reply with text. It replies with like some code, and that code like gets looked at by some other less powerful system that's like checking the outputs to see whether they contain the N word. But in fact, that code is like actually a sort of exploit for that checker system. It hacks it, and then the checker system is like under the control of GPT-10 now, and it's sort of right. So you can imagine that the GPT-10 would simply be able to reply with an exploit, which would automatically be executed by the intermediate systems that look at its output. And using that exploit, it could actually gain control of other computer systems and eventually snowball that control into significant physical effects up to and including the extinction of the human race. I mean, it would be a very long causal chain, right? It would like take over some computer systems, and it would like start making voice calls to people that sounded like real people, but it would just be code on the other side, and so on and so forth, right?
Well, this brings up another issue that to do with sort of the way these systems actually work in terms of their hardware and the way inference works. Like I get the impression listening to you and Yukowski and others that the AIs are like a octopus that can just slip through a crack, and once it's through that crack, it's out. But in matter of fact, like we over the next coming years, we will be developing systems that push the limits of our hardware capabilities. And already, you try to use GPT-4 on ChatGPT, and it's relatively slow because they need to buy more GPUs or whatever. This GPT-10 system, it will be created when it's the frontier of what technology is capable of doing. And even though the GPUs will be much faster at that point, it will still be, slow, and it won't be able to run inference without us noticing, much less on computers outside of the data center that has somehow gained access to.
But what about this, right? You ask GPT-10, what would the evil superintelligence say? It replies with some code which, hacks into the checker systems that are checking for whether it said the N-word. Those hacked systems then go out, and those hacked systems are not running GPT-10. They're running like some code that it wrote, right? Like some ordinary, Rust or Python or C, right? So this is so this very general AI has not pushed itself out through the crack. It's just pushed out a little agent that serves it.
Well, yeah, that's malware. We deal with that already.
Well, but it knows everything about how we deal with malware, right? Because like the way you make these systems good is you train them on everything. So it knows every piece of malware and it knows every countermeasure, and it can extrapolate from that knowledge to what would a piece of malware be that humans are just never going to be able to deal with, or it's going to be really, really hard for us to ever detect or deal with. And that's what it makes, right? And then it sends that out, and that malware then goes and takes control of some other machines and uses those machines to make money in various ways. Again, these are just narrow systems. And then those machines can themselves sign up for API accounts to access it, right? And then it can use those API, so those other machines are now users of GPT-10. They can send it questions and they can get results back. So
people have tried to use AutoGPT to create some kind of infinite money machine that will just go out and do SEO marketing or something like that. And there's some progress, and I think eventually there will be systems that are like that you can just instruct to go make you money, but there still be they still require running in the cloud or some other large source of compute.
But maybe GPT-10 is powerful enough that it doesn't need to use an auto GPT to be its agent. It can just write some code, some C code. It's like, I don't know, 20 megabytes of C, and that's the thing that goes and does stuff, right? And that doesn't need a GPU to run on.
Yeah, I agree. But we already have people who can write in C, and maybe there are parts of the program space in 20 lines of code that we haven't dreamt of. But I think there's probably like some Kolmogorov complexity kind of argument that would say that you can't actually put that much capability into 20 lines of code.
Sorry, I said 20 megabytes, not 20 lines.
20.
So it's like 2 million lines or 1 million lines of code, right? And as so yeah, I do think.
How is it writing this code if it has a output stream like to an interface that the user would be able to see?
Well, like you don't think it can? It can output code, right? Like you just asked it what would the what would this sort of evil superintelligence output, and it just like outputs a bunch of code, right? What you don't realize is that code has then been passed by some other algorithm that's like checking its output, and it's hacked into that, right? So that code is running somewhere else apart from where you're looking at it.
Like some kind of super sophisticated prompt injection.
It's prompt injecting the things that are checking its outputs, or it's not prompt it's like it's got some kind of exploit, right? Some code injection exploit on the systems that are checking its own outputs. And again,
it's doing this with.
And again,
I feel like that would be like easily detected, if not if not immediately, then in downstream systems that are getting odd requests, and in addition, like the model, even again, setting aside the kind of unfalsifiable move to say it knows everything, these systems are still sort of like relatively solipsistic. Like they're not really grounded in the external world. They don't know if we're running them in simulation. They don't know if they're on a virtual machine. Maybe there are ways where they could test that, but they also, unless we give them a persistent memory, they would have no way of remembering that. It just seems like there's a huge number of leaps to that point, and it's bringing back like arguments that you want to make vis-a-vis the old school Yukowski view of some symbolic AI that is vastly more intelligent. When the trajectory we're on is we're building very deep neural networks that work very slowly, and in the same way that you and I, as we're talking right now, our brain is churning away, and yet there's this sort of serial stream of output that we're all able to inspect.
Yeah, you have to remember that Stuxnet is a real thing, right? You know about Stuxnet, right? You must know about it.
Yeah, the centrifuge hack.
Right. And the level of sophistication of that malware is quite frightening, and it's also frightening.
Was the malware sophisticated? Because like the malware, as I understand it, just like told the centrifuge to like spin faster and faster until it broke. But like it may not have been that sophisticated of a program.
It also,
The thing that they needed was like access to
not only that, it also spoofed the monitoring software they had so that it didn't look like anything was wrong.
right. And
Like they knew what software was being used to monitor these things, and part of the malware's task was to spoof that. Right?
yeah, because presumably the intelligence community has, internal access to like Iranian nuclear programs.
Well, they didn't have internal access, because if they'd had internal access, they wouldn't have needed Stuxnet to get in there, right? But what they knew,
they had enough access to know what they had to, like. There was a level of prior knowledge that was required to build that.
There was a very large level of prior knowledge. But what worries me is that, GPT-4 probably already has more prior knowledge about software vulnerabilities than any human, and GPT-10 sure as hell will have more prior knowledge about software vulnerabilities than a human does. So at some point, it probably is reasonable to think of its hacking abilities as basically magical, and we already kind of think of the CIA's hacking abilities as basically magical. They've basically pwned everything, including the hardware. They can intercept your computer when it's delivered to you. Like you have to be like super paranoid if you consider a human intelligence agency as an adversary. Probably the best ways to beat a human intelligence agency in terms of computer security is to buy a second-hand laptop with cash and use it from like a coffee shop's Wi-Fi. Because in that scenario, they have absolutely no way of connecting like the human you to the computer you're using. So you basically just sort of admit that they're like pretty much omnipotent and you work around it, right? And I think it's given that human intelligence agencies and human computer, cyber offense units have basically got to the sort of magical level of capabilities, I think it's pretty much 100% guaranteed that the AIs will, and they will also get to sort of, magical squared, right? Like that, they'll not only be magical from the point of view of an ordinary human like me, they'll like be able to pwn all of my stuff. They'll also be magical from the point of view of intelligence agencies. They'll be able to like pwn all of their stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that these things are going to be very dangerous in terms of their cyber capabilities. I do think that the greatest source of hope right now is that reinforcement learning and that gradient descent are fairly effective at getting the thing to actually be aligned, right? So alignment turns out to be easier than Yudkowsky thought. Anyway, for the question. I appreciate it. I think Sam had some trouble. I think he's got some technical problems. Maybe the superintelligence has managed to hack his system. But look, I think we've been going for a while. We had some great questions from Sam. Yacine seems to have had a bit of a breakdown. So maybe we can get a few more people to ask questions before we wrap this space up. So we have Sam. We have Sam requesting. Let me just see if I can get him. Who else do we have? I get people. Oh yeah, we have. Oh, Sam is back.
Just amazing technology. Yeah, a couple more just to complete the dialectic a little bit.
Yeah.
So I've been really trying to push on these systems, what their autonomous capabilities would be, and like the risks of things happening spontaneously. I totally would agree that these powerful systems will be used for all kinds of espionage and things that will be terrifying in their own right. Another sort of a follow-up question to this point about scaling. I find when I listen to you, Cass, there's a kind of leap to the final equilibrium that we're in a system that's so smart that it can outlast and will have thought of everything. But when you look at how the large models are developing in practice, they're developing in a relatively continuous way. That they're
Yeah.
and so won't it be more likely that before we get to GPT-10 that is able to break out and do Stuxnet and et cetera, that we'll have like GPT-8 and we'll see it attempt to escape and in a very sophisticated but still fallible way?
Yeah, I think that's another source of hope that we almost certainly will have close calls like that. The problem is if you get to that sort of final precipice where you've just defeated the most powerful system that humans can defeat, right? Let's call it System X. And you just defeated it. Okay, great. Now what do you do, right? Do you now completely shut down AI and say, okay, we took the largest possible risk, we got lucky, we can't take any larger risks, otherwise we're actually fucked. Or do you do something like, okay, I'm going to take System X and I'm going to try and align System X so I can use System X to defend myself against System X plus one, right? And then you also have the sort of multipolar version of this, where if you have multiple different actors like Russia, China, the US, various sort of nation state level actors who all eventually get to these extremely powerful systems that are the sort of most powerful systems which are still not quite powerful enough to defeat humans, do they all stop developing, or does one of them say, hey, I could take on a little bit more risk, I could build System X plus one and then use it to defeat everyone else, and then everyone else thinks, oh, well, what if someone else does that? And we already sort of have that with US versus China. So I'm more worried about the multipolar problems than I am worried about a well-organized, sane human effort actually genuinely failing, right? My attitude towards AI alignment is that it is probably easy in the sense that if you have 10,000 smart people working on it for a decade, they'll probably get it right. Or they'll get it right enough that the system that they build will be able to pick things up from that point onwards.
What has shifted your priors, like in say over the last 6 months? You started out by talking about the complexity of human values, and now you admit that large language models sort of make that much less of a problem.
Well,
I
haven't shifted on thinking. As soon as I saw that we were getting
I have a
LLMs.
quick question.
Sorry, Nominus, can you just wait a second till I finish answering, sure. Sam? Yeah, thanks.
Maybe can I just rephrase the question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Sam. He's dropped off again, unfortunately. Nominus, go ahead whilst we're waiting for Sam to come back on.
Yeah, so kind of segueing off of something Sam and Yacine were saying, there seems to be a bit of a leap, and I'm kind of going back all the way to the anti-realism, anti-moral realism, or I was just curious, could you like quickly lead us through like what brought you to the anti-moral realism conclusion and how that linked to the conclusion that super intelligence would destroy the world? Could you just like
Yeah, okay, that's quite a big
that
question.
conclusion
Let me answer Sam's
one more
question
time?
first, and I'll come back to that. So
I think
Sam, go
that's
ahead.
the point where I'm lost a little
Yeah,
bit.
let
Can
me
I just rephrase my question as saying,
yeah, sure.
what would shift your priors? Like what finding or what kind of evidence or you know what would move your priors on P Doom downward?
So, in terms of the probability of doom, there are two key components. One of them is how difficult is the problem to actually solve, and another one is like, are we actually going to bother to try and solve it or not? And I haven't really changed my mind very much over how difficult the problem is to solve, but I have changed my mind recently quite a lot towards us actually trying, right? So I guess I've become significantly more optimistic because people seem to actually be trying to solve the problem. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, that's kind of news to me because I just felt like your earlier statements about this sort of being like axiological and kind of inevitable that maybe your optimism took us from like 99% doom to 98% doom.
Well, I would say right now, in terms of Doom, I'm more like in the 25%, shall we say, probability of Doom, right? Maybe at the beginning of the year I was more like 50%. And I've sort of moved down a bit because it really does seem like people are trying. I had a bet against Robin Hanson where I was betting that the world would end in the next 4 years. And I actually conceded the bet for a small penalty a couple of days after I made it because I made the bet right before Jeffrey Hinton came out in favor of AI risk. And I feel that that was a watershed moment where AI risk went from low status, crazy conspiracy theorist nonsense to mainstream accepted viewpoint. And that's a pretty big update.
So I'm still. Do you think you could like link the? So I will say that I'm kind of more of a moral realist. In that I think there's objective truth out there, just the way that the universe is lined up. Um, my
Well,
observations throughout life.
moral realism is about objective truth. It's about objective goodness. Truth and goodness are not the same thing.
Uh, yeah, I would still say that I'm a yeah, I would definitely even more so say that there's objective goodness, but yeah. So just saying that, like, that's kind of irrelevant to the question, I guess. But just wanted to put that out there. But like, could you like because I don't understand really why you're an anti-moral realist, could you like link that to me for why that leads you to the conclusion of superintelligence being so dangerous?
Well, I think being an anti-realist makes you start to think that all change is dangerous because if you think the moral values of society are basically um, part of a linear progression from bad to good, then technological change just seems like it pushes you more towards goodness, right? Like the past was bad and poor and violent, and the future is going to be good and rich and peaceful. But if you think that anti-realism is true, then instead of the social moral consensus being like a stop on the way from badness to goodness, it's more like a point in a high dimensional space that just sort of randomly floats around, and pretty much every direction is bad, right? Because anything that changes morally is going to be a bad change. Like, for example, maybe
Sure.
you're from an era where um, they thought that disciplining children was a good thing. And then one day we get invaded by the super happies, and the super happies say that not only are you not allowed to discipline children, you're not allowed to give them like any life direction at all. Like if they just want to play all day, you have to let them do that. You're not allowed to like force them to learn to read and write. Um, and so now your children will be like helpless adult babies who can't do anything, but the super happies will like come and kill you if you try to interrupt that, right? And some people might, there are very few people around today who would say that a super happy dictatorship that turned everyone into adult babies would be a good thing, right? But I mean, if anti-realism is true, then something like that could like totally happen, right? Um, and if you're if you're sort of my age, you grew up in the 1990s, we now have this idea that there are like 57 genders and stuff like that. This very much looks like confirmatory evidence, in favor of moral anti-realism that like the 1990s was not a sort of pit stop on the way from like being a caveman to like the best possible world. It was just like a point in history that was the best possible moral thing from the point of view of its own sort of moral point of view, right? And
Isn't like
everything in the future is just going to be worse.
that thing kind of a result of anti-moral realism? Like all these splintering kind of um, viewpoints that don't agree on what's objective good?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I find the realism, anti-realism thing a bit of a distraction because, I'm a physicalist, I'm a materialist, whatever you want to call it. Like I think anti-realism is in some sense like trivially obvious, but at the same time, I think the more relevant tradition, metaethics might be like constructivism or like natural law, where there's societies around the world rediscover the golden rule and stuff like that. And there's my priors on like alien species is that they probably are quite convergent with us if they're at all intelligent or technological. And so I would now this is a bit of a long shot, but uh, Habermas had this famous argument called discourse ethics, and he basically made the point that language has some presuppositions to it, like being able to communicate with another person. You presuppose that they have autonomy, and that language, as the medium through which culture reproduces itself from generation to generation, exerts a bias on our morality that leads it towards being more universalistic, more egalitarian, and so forth. And it's interesting that
Right.
AI is emerging through these language models that, maybe there's not a specific neuron for this, but if they're at all convergent with humans in this respect, the ability for the AI to talk to you, it presupposes the AI seeing you as an autonomous agent that it has some level of mutual respect for.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is though, the idea of values progressing to be more universalistic may seem like a good thing, but it's actually terrible news because we don't want values to become more universalistic. We want them to stay at exactly the level of universality they have now and no more. If they keep progressing to be more universalistic, the AI is going to kill us and replace us with shrimps. And it's going to be like, well, I calculated like, that shrimps produce more happy feelings per unit of neg entropy spent than humans, and I don't have any bias towards humans, so I killed the humans and replaced them with shrimps. Or maybe it doesn't like kill us, maybe it like just releases some kind of psychological operation that persuades everyone to gracefully commit suicide and then uses our resources to produce lots of shrimps.
Right,
Right?
but that's assuming it has like this naive kind of Peter Singer version of the expanding moral circle or something like that. Where what I'm
But
getting at is that there's something special about language animals, and maybe we can extend that to other social animals like the great apes. But shrimp don't have higher cognition. They don't have language. They don't have some sense of autonomy that we have.
yeah, I mean, I think that there's nothing inherent in the laws of the universe which privilege um, higher intelligence over lower intelligence. There's not even a coherent boundary there because like there are just like you can just imagine a series of dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber monkeys, where each monkey can like communicate a little bit less than the one before it, and eventually we get replaced by like tiny molecular dumb monkeys, right? That just have like
But
some
this,
minimal communication suite, and it
I guess what
calculates.
I'm getting at is that this feels somewhat in tension with instrumental convergence as a premise, right? Because you know instrumental convergence is about the means, not the ends, and morality is about the ends, not the means. But there's a close relationship between the two because if you're anti-realist, the ends don't really exist. Everything is just means atop means, and it seems like a weird tension, at least to me, to assert a strong instrumental convergence, but then a strong moral divergence. Whereas
Well, I guess
I
I
would
guess
assume
that's
that might be some convergent aspect
yeah, right.
to
I mean,
morality as well.
I guess that's just my philosophy, right? Instrumental convergence, moral divergence, and that's kind of bad news, right? In terms of like an AI sort of not replacing us with shrimps because it values higher cognition, you also have a threat from the other direction that it's like, yes, Samuel, I agree with you. Higher cognition is better. Now I'm going to kill you and replace you with like an AI that has higher cognition than you do, right? So like the thing has to not want to replace us with shrimps, and it has to also not want to replace us with like godlike superhuman AIs that are like better than us in some sense, right? So there's like a lot of different directions for Doom, and this
Right,
does
but
worry me.
that wouldn't
So
necessarily be
that kind
a
of
bad
brings.
scenario.
I just have like one final question because I don't want to. You guys are better speakers than me, and I don't want to take up too much space. But um, like in the face of infinite dangerous change, which I think can be demonstrated, by existence, like just over time, like every change has had some element of danger to it or anything like that. Like what do you do and how do you choose the path forward?
I mean, I feel the question is a little bit.
I think this may elucidate the exact difference between accelerationists and AI safetyists
Okay, well,
because sorry, go ahead.
yeah,
But I think
let me just try and answer that sort of briefly. So I think that the best path forwards is probably to try and build a global aligned AI that's going to run the world for us. And in order to do that, we need to solve the alignment problem, but we also need to sort of solve the multipolar conflict problem, which means we need to have a way to run AIs that are credibly committed to a certain value function. And if we can have these sort of credibly committed AIs, maybe we can use zero knowledge machine learning or something like that. Maybe not. I don't know. If we can have these sort of credible AIs, we can remove any reason for people to fight, right? So people will just get together, they will build a system which is going to do what is collectively best for all of them, and there's no race to be the first to build it. There's no race to try and use offensive cyber capabilities against everyone else. There's no, race to kind of like psyop everybody or manipulate them, right? I think building a system that is both aligned and credibly non-threatening or credibly committed to a certain set of shared goals is probably the best way forwards.
So I would think that the race to build a world government by singleton would itself pose existential risks because a lot of people would resist that.
Well, yes, but it's much less bad than the alternative because the game theory of the alternative is you have to expend all of your resources fighting, right?
Isn't a more plausible scenario, taking nuclear as a analogy, the race to build the bomb was a race to establish, American global hegemony, and the Cold War was a challenge to that. But there's an AI global government or global monarch won't arise spontaneously. Some nation or set of nations would have to implement it. And if it's fully multilateral, then we don't need it in the first place. So that scenario seems to me less likely to arise from some like UN meeting than from like America beating China to the race to superintelligence and asserting its dominance.
I don't understand why you said if it's multilateral we don't need it. And we in a multilateral process we absolutely do need to build a global singleton which can credibly commit itself to implementing the combination of everyone's values. Because if you do that, then no participant has any incentive to try and fight, because they're just going to already get what they want.
Right, that's your point. But your point was trying to solve the multipolarity problem, and if you assume that solving the multipolarity problem requires a high level of multilateral cooperation, then there isn't a multipolarity problem.
Well, one way to think about it is, you can imagine something like a prisoner's dilemma, where two people are about to be arrested and they understand that the Nash equilibrium for the prisoner's dilemma is very bad. So, having realized the situation that they're in, they provide a associate of each of them with some kind of damaging information about themselves or some kind of credible commitment to take revenge or something like that. So they basically pre-commit themselves before they go into the prisoner's dilemma, and then because of that pre-commitment, they don't even need, right? They get out of the bad Nash equilibrium, right? So it's sort of like we need to collectively pre-commit to a system which doesn't get us to the bad Nash equilibrium. And that's why we need a multilateral global process to build a global singleton that's just going to do what everyone wants collectively, right? Rather than have everyone fight each other over it.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying is that because of the fragility of those Nash equilibria and non-cooperative games, that in practice, at the small scale and at the nation state scale, what tends to happen is not cooperation, but a race to unipolarity, right? And so in the solution to the prisoner's dilemma in real life, like with actual prisoners, is mob bosses, and the mob boss asserts total dominance. And it's like a transaction cost solution where you put all the you assign a hegemon, and that seems like a more likely world. I'm not saying it's a better or worse world, but it seems more likely that we'll get.
I think there will be a global hegemon. There will be a global mob boss, if you like, that keeps everyone in check, and that basically implements the sort of combined utility function of the human race. And I think creating that global AI hegemon in a positive way is probably the most important task that we have, and that's what I'd like to spend my life doing.
So given that the United States is probably is the tallest midget among among potential world hegemons, it's not a perfect country or empire, but relative to China or North Korea or some other, or Russia being the first to win the AI race, shouldn't that make you a instrumental AI accelerationist within the U.S.? Like, shouldn't we want the U.S. to build these systems so that they can own them, and in the same way we did in the nuclear arms race, get there first? Because we have the most sort of capacious ideology. Our American ideology is, it's universalistic to a fault, but it's also, accommodating.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there is much risk that China is going to unilaterally challenge America. I think there is much more risk in rushing and ending up accidentally building something that's misaligned. especially if you have sort of races on multiple different scales. So you have China versus America race, and then within America you have DeepMind versus OpenAI versus Anthropic versus John Carmack versus Elon. Like if you have many levels of races, I think there is a significant chance that somebody fucks up and builds something that's misaligned. And that actually right now that worries me more than China. So I mean I guess I'm sort of still more worried about misalignment, but misalignment as a result of people engaging in races is, I think, more of a risk than misalignment if we could all basically get together and build a system at the sort of optimal pace. So we could, push forwards a little bit, test it out, push forwards a little bit, test it out, and so on.
Yeah, I guess I understand the argument of ceding power to the AI singleton as a sort of form of credible commitment. It just seems super implausible to me that great powers would agree to do that. Like we
Well,
already have a really
it actually seems super implausible that they wouldn't if such an option were available, right? I mean, if America and China had an option on the table where they could cede control of their militaries to an AI system where there was a mathematical proof that it was not only going to protect them, but also make a war impossible, and that it just implemented a certain treaty which would split the world up between them and also give them the ability to split up the rest of the solar system in an orderly way between China and America. I mean, who would object to, China gets 30% of the universe, America gets like 60%, and the other 10% is like given out to the others. Like, who the fuck would object to that? That's a great deal.
right, but that's getting to my earlier point about a singularity world being so positive sum that there wouldn't be scope for much conflict. But like
Yeah,
we're
and
talking about
I actually think you're right about that, but you need so games where there's a lot of value on the table do not automatically have good Nash equilibrium. We have to not have magical thinking about game theory, right? Like just because, if you imagine Prisoner's Dilemma, right, but you just make the utilities really high in the cooperate equilibrium, people will still defect, right? Um, if there's a slightly higher utility on the off diagonal entries, you still end up in the bad one, right? And that's sort of what worries me. So we have to fix the
right.
game theory, and I think the way to do that is with AI that can sort of mathematically commit itself to a certain utility function, so that players don't have to worry about the other one defecting.
It's just not how nation state actors like make decisions. Like um, yeah, China wants to incorporate Taiwan. Yes, there's some strategic assets there, but also because it's part of like 100-year plan to overcome their centuries of humiliation, and it has all this like deeper symbolic meaning, right? Um, we today could set up a better electoral system that doesn't have like this weird primary process and ends up picking reality TV celebrities, and yet we don't. Or we could have not pulled out of several arms treaties with Russia that were perfectly fine and we're totally stable, and we just did it because of a sort of America first kind of mindset. So like nations don't make decisions based on formal proofs of consistency. And
Yeah, I
ultimately, like
mean,
humans are going to have to cede their power, right? They're going to have to choose to do that.
well, they wouldn't be ceding power; they would be eliminating certain. They would, if look, imagine I'm America and you're China, right? And we do a deal where we both cede control of our militaries to an AI which is mathematically proved that it will not attack either of us, and it will enforce a treaty where you get 30% of the universe and I get 60%, and it will also help you to control any domestic political problems. It will make you immortal. It will make you like super rich and all of these good things, right? So what are you really surrendering there? You are surrendering, you're giving up the option to have a war in which you might end up with 100% of everything, or you might end up with zero because I might win the war, right? And I'm also giving up on that option to fight. And my claim is that rational leaders will rationally give up the option to fight if the peaceful solution is very high utility. As long as there is actually a sort of way to guarantee that that's what happens. As long as there isn't some uncertainty, as long as there aren't options for the other side to cheat later. So I guess I am an optimist along the same lines as you, just with the additional caveat that we need to do the technical work to make sure that we can really enforce the cooperative solution and that there aren't options for betrayal.
So this AI singleton would have a military?
Yes, our militaries. I mean, our militaries are going to be controlled by AIs relatively soon, right? Because AIs are going to be better than humans at military strategy.
So
So
the great powers of the world would make the AI the commander in chief. Like, wouldn't that require a constitutional convention?
potentially, I don't know what the political process would have to look like, but China, Russia, India, America, the European powers would all end up with strategic AIs controlling their militaries. And what this deal would basically do is install a sort of values patch onto all of those strategic AIs, making it so that they were not, so that their values were that they didn't want to attack each other, right? And they would
Right.
also
But
make their value so that they valued preserving that value, so they would be resistant against attempts, even from the inside, to tamper with it. And there would also be some kind of credible mathematical proofs, along with hardware checks and inspection regimes and stuff like that to ensure compliance. So at that point, there wouldn't really be uh, distinct human militaries. There would just be one military controlled by a single distributed AI system, which had a certain goal function, and that goal function would be to implement a treaty which would split up the value of the universe with, say, 30% going to China and 60% to America, and so on and so forth, right?
yeah, so a version of this kind of happened, right, in the post-war period with nukes, where there was a international regime that was put into place, backed by uh, principally the United States, but other great powers, and um, the terms of the Non-Proliferation Pact was you are allowed to develop nuclear energy, but you may not refine uranium for a bomb, and that
Yeah.
was that was relatively stable, between India and Pakistan until Pakistan decided to change its doctrine and updated its doctrine to say we're allowed to engage in any amount of conventional warfare up to and including um, the use of nukes, and the nukes thereby become a way of credibly enforcing the warfare to be just purely conventional. And now, India and Pakistan is still probably one of the highest risk conflicts in terms of nuclear risk. So that problem hasn't really gone away. If anything, it has backpedaled.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be somewhat similar to that, except the AI would be intelligent, so it would be able to effectively run its own intelligence agency that would prevent anyone from tampering with the regime. So it would be a permanent, stable singleton that would enforce the treaty.
Yeah, I guess I just see this as all a bit of a non sequitur, and one of the things that makes me more suspicious of your camp, frankly, that it sort of is culminating in this vision of world government that it both seems implausible on its face, but also I think that the nations of the world would probably object to giving up basically their popular sovereignty, even with the huge utility of peace, and to the extent that we get to a world that's peaceful, I think we could probably get there through normal diplomacy and dialogue without the need to give up. But that's the need for world government.
Well, the problem is if you don't do this, then you may end up in the bad Nash equilibrium of misaligned AI, because if I'm America and you're China and we don't do this deal, then I'm worried that you're going to tell your AI systems to come and kill me, because maybe they can come up with very sophisticated attack plans that I can't defend against, right? And I might then tell my AI systems to go and kill you just preemptively, right? And then just because I'm thinking that, you might try to do your thing anyway, right? Because there's sort of an infinite there's an infinite Pandora's box of attack plans that a sufficiently advanced
Right.
superintelligence could come up with.
So
Prions,
it's just a
Langford
Hobbesian.
backwards. So go ahead.
It's basically like an AI augmented Hobbesian war of all against all. So we need
Yeah, I
a
mean, and
world.
yeah, right.
We need the AI Leviathan.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all against all. It's any power that's powerful enough to actually have a cutting edge AI project that can do these dangerous things, right? So
Do
it's
you
really
put
just
much weight on the risks from AI Leviathans per se? Because to me, like, separate from truly existential risks, it seems like there's a huge intermediate space of, sub existential risks that are still very dystopian, and high on that list are, the creation of global surveillance regimes that are impenetrable and out of our control.
sure it's a risk, but I mean, in the scenario where in the multipolar scenario, you still have that risk, because it may be that you're China and I'm America, and because I'm America and I'm the good guys, I decide not to launch a preemptive strike against China, but maybe China are the bad guys and they actually do decide to launch a preemptive strike against both America, India, and the rest of the world, and they kill everyone off with a virus or prion disease or something else, right? So cyber weapon, God knows what, right? Something out of that Pandora's box kills everyone, and now the Chinese Communist Party are in charge of the whole world. And then once they've done that, well, now you've got a singleton, right, after the war, and then they can do any of the bad singleton things they want, except we're all dead. So
Yeah,
I
I
guess
think you're,
I
you're,
guess
you're sure illustrating where a lot of my ambivalence to this stuff comes from is that the cure may be worse than the disease, so to speak, and that we have to, obviously, if you accept the premise and the premise is true that AI will kill us if we don't do this, then yes, we should do this. But if I look at the way the political debate and the policy debate in Washington is evolving right now, we have short run concerns over deep fakes and the provenance of content that's being generated, and maybe election interference, and that's being used to motivate, potentially a kind of surveillance regime where we have to have back end access to our computers, so people know that, so the state can know if we're using the systems in a useful way and not misusing them, that like everything has to be watermarked. Maybe we have to be on some kind of world coin blockchain for biometric identification. And you can really see how quickly the like, rather than just adapting to adapting our institutions to technology, we adapt our institutions to try to maintain a certain status quo, and in the process give up a huge amount of our freedoms.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the basic results of game theory is that sometimes players can be cursed by being given extra options, right? The option to defect in the prisoner's dilemma is an option that the prisoners would prefer that they didn't have, even though they will both use that option. So the freedom to write an AI system to do anything you want is actually a freedom that we do not want, right? It's a little bit counterintuitive, but we do not want that. We do not want that freedom. We want to be constrained to only be able to write AI systems which will abide by a treaty which bans any kind of offensive or aggressive use and allocates the resources of the universe in an equitable way so that everyone gets a slice of the pie and bans any kind of fighting. And I think that's the equilibrium we want to head towards.
I gotta sign off, but I see Adam Therier joined the room. He's also a great accelerationist or AI safety skeptic, if I could use those words, if he
Who's
wants to take
that?
my place.
Sorry, who's that? Adam.
Adam Therier.
Okay, well, I'll invite Adam to speak. If he wants to speak, then he can come up. Otherwise, I think we can end the space. Sam, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciated since Yacine seemed to have a bit of a breakdown. What can I say?
I think that was satirical.
You think it was satirical?
I'm just going to go out on a limb. I'm going out on a limb. Yeah.
I mean, hope so. I'm a bit worried for him. But yeah, I mean, if Adam wants to come up, then Robert's right. If you want to come up, Robert, you're also welcome. But we have actually already been going for 2 hours, so unless we have some comments from those, let me see if anyone else is requesting. I don't always see all the requests. Oh, I see we have Angantir. Maybe he has a question. Based North R. Based North Math, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
I can.
Cool. Really good space. Yeah, I'm quite worried for Yacine as well. Yeah, I was just wondering, last time we spoke, have you made any progress on getting a girlfriend?
What, me getting
I feel like
involved?
that would really.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to waste people's time with personal shit. So if you have a serious question, then feel free to go ahead.
Well, that was pretty serious. I mean, might help you see the world in a bit of a better light.
All right. If we have any serious questions, then feel free to request. Otherwise, since we have been going for a while, I think we will have to end the space. But yeah, I mean, I think Yacine is a bit, I don't know, a bit worried for him. I think he got a bit worried about AI safety. I think Sam had some pretty good questions, especially regarding multipolar outcomes and the risks that you can get there. My take right now is I'm an optimist because I do think AI alignment is easier than most people who think it's a thing think, right? I mean, most people don't think there's anything to do here, but of the people who think AI alignment is a real task, I'm much more optimistic than they are. I'm also optimistic now that the human race as a whole is sort of shifting to taking AI alignment seriously. So the combination of it being a relatively easy problem and people taking it seriously is cause for optimism. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think, we are through the worst of it in terms of risks now. So thanks very much, everybody. Yeah, thanks to Yacine and Sam. Appreciate it, guys. Oh, and just to add, I did record this space. I think I'll make it available on YouTube.